Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint countryside geraniums with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. We are going to go over brushes and colors that we'll need for this painting. I'll be using 4 different brushes for this. And so this one is the number 12 bright brush. It's a Royal and Langnickel Majestic brush. And these 3 are Princeton Velvet Touch brushes. They actually come together in a pack. So 3/4 wash, 4 round, and number 8 round brush. There are 6 paint colors in this, so a limited color palette, which is always nice. And you can actually take out one of the reds and just use the 5 colors for this. So Alizarin Crimson, Cad Red Medium, Mars Black, Titanium White, Phthalo Blue, and Hooker's Green Hue Permanent. If you want to take out one of the reds, you can take out the Alizarin Crimson and just add a teeny bit of black to your Cadmium Red Medium so you can get kind of a dark red for that. We're going to start by drawing a line across our canvas. So everything above that line is going to be sky, and everything below that line is going to be grass ground. And so I'm going to position this line at 4 inches, and I'm using a T-square ruler to help line my line so it's parallel to the edge of the canvas, and just lightly draw a line across, and then load your palette with titanium white and phthalo blue. We will be painting the sky first, and we'll be using the 3/4 wash brush. I am making a very light blue on my palette. It's like 1 part blue to maybe 5 or 6 parts white. It should be a very, very light blue. I'm going to start out light and then kind of work dark on the outside. So on the very, very center part of this background, it needs to be a very light blue. This is going to help create contrast in our main focus, which is the bucket with the flowers. So that's going to stand out very nicely if this part is very light. So we're going to do light, a big kind of light blob in the center part of the sky. And I'm just kind of mixing those colors on the canvas, just kind of flip-flopping my brush, expressive paint strokes. And I like to not blend my colors all the way so you get a nice, pretty variation of your blue and white. Again, you want to make sure that this is super light, and that's going to help create contrast in our flowers later. As we work to the edge of the canvas, I'm actually going to grab a little bit more blue on my palette and allow the sky to be a little bit darker on the far edges. So to do that, you're just loading your brush with just a tad bit more blue. Phthalo blue is such a dark, strong color, so you only need like little bits of it. And it really doesn't take much to get that blue to be dark. So just teeny tiny bits of that blue. If you're finding that your color is just kind of like, if you loaded your brush with too much blue, you may have to wipe the brush off or rinse it. And get some more white on there and blend that in. We just have a nice bright blob in the center, and it gradually blends to kind of this darker medium, that's not too dark, a little bit medium blue on the outsides and the far left and far right edges of the canvas. And blend that in. Just a bunch of kind of scribble paint strokes using the full width of the brush and not blending it all the way for the purpose of color variation. It makes the background look a little bit more interesting. I'm going to load a little bit more white on my paint palette and rinse my brush off because I really want to emphasize the fact that this center part needs to be nice and bright. It doesn't need to be pure white, but it just needs to be a very, very light blue. I'm just going to blend that in a little bit more in the center so it's nice and bright in the center, and I'm going to leave my edges slightly darker. We're going to do the ground of this painting next. We don't need to wait for the sky to dry to do this. And we don't even need to rinse our brush off actually. So we're going to load our paint palette with the color Hooker's Green Hue. Without rinsing the brush, let's grab our green. We don't need to mix it with anything at this point, and it's okay if I still had a little bit of blue and white on my brush. However, if it was too saturated with blue and white, I probably would have rinsed it off or wiped it. On the very bottom of this green grassy area, it's a little bit darker, and then it fades to a much lighter green in the distance. So that's going to create some depth in our little grassy area that we're creating. So starting out with just the pure Hooker's Green Hue at the bottom, I did about halfway, and then I stopped and I grabbed this titanium white. So now I'm doing just below the horizon line. And this line actually doesn't have to be perfectly straight. If you want it to be more like a hill line or just not a straight line, that is fine. I'm going to take that white, and it should be a very light green in the distance. So I'm going to bring this down, and we're going to eventually have to blend that with our dark green. We're going to create this gradient of light green to dark green at the bottom. So when I get to what I call the transition zone of where that light color hits a dark color, I want to kind of paint over that area several times with white and a little bit of green. And that gets your colors to blend. The more you brush over it, the more it kind of blends wet on wet. And it doesn't have to be a perfect gradient if there's darker streaks in the background or lighter streaks on the bottom, that's fine. This is just our first layer. We'll go back over this much later in the painting to add some grass texture. So when you're done with your sky and ground, you'll want to let this dry before going on to this next step. And in this next step, we will be drying the metal bucket that our geraniums will be in, and we'll be using a piece of chalk. I am starting at about 3 inches on the left and about 1.5 inches on the bottom. So a little bit more than center, this bottom piece. And the width of this line, so this line is just slightly curved. It's almost flat, but it's a little bit more of a shallow curve going downwards. It's about 7.5 inches wide. You don't have to do these exact measurements. You can kind of adjust them if you want. And then the height of these two angles are about 3.5 inches on each side. You want to kind of make the angles as even as possible. And at the very top, we have a very, very kind of thin oval line for the opening of this metal bucket. So a lot of this opening is going to be disguised by our flowers and leaves. I'm redrawing this oval over and over a few times so I get the shape that I want. And this opening is about 8.5 inches wide. Whereas the bottom curve of this is about 7.5 inches wide, so it gets a little bit wider because of the angled lines on the sides. We're going to draw the handle of the bucket. So this is kind of hanging out on the far right here. It's going to be going through this hole. So I did these two diagonal lines, one that kind of goes behind the right side of the bucket, and another little diagonal line for the handle, and then a little circle for the piece of the handle that's kind of going through the bucket. So you can kind of sketch that out. When we paint that in, we can define that a little bit more. We're going to paint the bucket next, and we're going to load our paint palette with black and white. So Mars Black, titanium white, and get a fresh cup of water. And I'm going to be using the number 12 bright brush. So this is a little flat brush. It's about 1/2 inch wide. And we're going to start by kind of outlining the inner part of the bucket. So I have about equal parts black and white. So this needs to start out to be a very, very dark gray. And we're just going to paint the inner parts of this. The edges of the bucket are dark. and I'm just defining the shape so it's curved. The bottom, I'm going kind of diagonal on the sides, and then up here, we can take this dark color and do this curve. So I have pretty much the whole inner part outlined. And then as I start to fill this in, I'm going to start gradually adding little bits of white in there, titanium white. And I want to make sure that I am using the full width of the brush and that I'm painting in this curved direction. It's going to give our bucket some form. And also we're trying to kind of create the impression of metal. And so it wouldn't be just the same gray throughout. We would have different variations of dark and light with this gray color. So as I'm painting this in, I'm going to allow my color to blend, but not all the way. So I have streaks of kind of darker and lighter colors. So the middle part of our bucket, we're painting in a curved direction and also with more white. This white is blending with that black, creating a kind of a medium to light gray. But our edges, I want to try to keep the edges, especially the far left and far right edges, extra dark. Up here, I'm going to do this opening solid black. So without rinsing the brush, let's just grab the black and we can outline that oval opening and then fill it in solid with black, keeping in mind that a lot of the flowers and leaves are going to be kind of just covering this area anyway. So if it looks kind of flawed, it's okay. So I'm going to cover all of that solid black. Then I'm going to go back and kind of add some dark and lights to my metal buckets. So specifically over here, I kind of outline the far edge and I'm dragging some of this black inwards a little bit, but not all the way. I want to keep the middle part of my bucket lighter. I'm going to do the same thing over here on the right, kind of outline the far right edge and just kind of drag using the full width of the brush inwards in a curved direction so that it's a little bit dark on the edges. Trying to give it that rustic kind of shiny galvanized steel metal look. And then on the inside of our bucket, let's grab, or in the middle part of the bucket, let's grab some more white. I'm going to make this part a little bit more light and shiny. Of course, this might be mixing too much, especially if that layer is still kind of wet. It might be turning kind of more gray, so you may have to rinse the brush or kind of wait for this to dry to go back and kind of add this lighter layer. So I did a little bit of this kind of like straight curved line on the far right edge to give it kind of a shiny sort of highlight. I'm going to do the same thing over here on the right. A little bit outlined straight and then kind of drag that in. But it's important to kind of not blend it all the way. A few more light. So at this point, it is kind of saturated, so it's kind of all blending to the same color. So I'm going to kind of just let it be. And when this layer dries, I can go back and add lighter highlights in there if I need to. So see how doing that didn't really do anything. It's just all kind of blending to the same color. I'm going to take my black and just kind of outline the outer edge real quick. And this bottom part, so that part is dark. And then the bottom edge of the bucket is also very dark. Blend that just a little bit more in with the white. Outline the far right edge a bit. And drag some more gray in there. Make sure this is all defined and outlined. Okay, at this point, I am going to carefully remove any chalk lines that are still visible. So I'm going to use a clean, wet brush, number 4 round brush. I'm just going to go in there and kind of gently remove any of the leftover chalk lines. You just want to be really careful not to get water on any of the paint that's still wet. You can also wait till later to remove these lines. I am going to remove the handle line as well. I didn't paint the handle yet. If you want to leave that, you can, but this was just to kind of get an estimate of what it's going to look like. And so I am going to do my shadowing next. And this is specifically in the grass area underneath the pan. And we are going to load some fresh Hooker's Green Hue onto our palette. And we can do this with the number 12 bright brush. So the same brush that we used to paint the metal bowl bucket. To rinse that all off, get all the black and white off. And let's add just a teeny bit of black into our green. So it's just a slightly darker shade of green. And then under the bucket, you want to just gently kind of fill this darker area in. I'm doing these kind of full width paint strokes, curves, in a curved kind of direction underneath the bucket, going all the way to the bottom edge of the canvas. So just very loosely creating this dark shadowy area in the grass. You can take a little bit more of this green. So this should show up darker because we are using we're doing a second coat of paint on here, but also we added just a teeny bit of black in there, so it should show up a lot darker. And also I'm creating kind of a lighter shadow on the edges, so the shadow just kind of fades out a little bit with just green and not green black. And I'm just very kind of lightly, almost dry brushing some of the lighter color on the outer parts of the shadow, so the shadow just kind of fades away a little bit. And then we want to add not pure black, because pure black is going to kind of mess up the shape of the bucket here, but like a darker green just under the bucket where that shadow would be the darkest. So I'm just blending a much darker green right below the bucket and blending that into the rest of the shadow color. I'm going to do the handle of the bucket next, and this is ideally done if your bucket is dry or mostly dry, because we don't want this color to mesh too much with wet paint. I'm going to load my paint palette with some fresh titanium white, and I'm going to be using the number 4 round brush. This is the first time we're using this brush in this painting. So with the round brush, I'm going to kind of just go over where I had my chalk drawing lines and do that diagonal line. Then there's another diagonal line on the right. Part of the handle is going to look like it's going behind that part of the bucket. So I'm just outlining that shape with a relatively thick line of white paint. And then right here, I'm doing like a little handle. The edges of the handle are a little bit curved on the left and the right edges, and on the top and the bottom, it's a little bit curved. And the handle is going at an angle. Then we can start introducing some black into this to start giving it some more shading. So I'm going to load my palette with a little bit more Mars Black. Wipe the brush off a little bit, but don't rinse. Grab a little bit of black on the tip of the paintbrush. And then right here, we have that little hole that handle is going through. I'm just going to do like a little kind of half circle curved line around the end of that handle. I'm going to wipe the brush off again and grab white this time, and I'm going to do another kind of curve around that. So it's going to look kind of like a circle, but it's going to stop. So that goes around the black hole. So we have a white circle that goes around the black circle. I'm going to take some of that black that's still on my brush and up on the bottom of this, kind of blend that in. So it's kind of a light to medium gray on the bottom, but white on the top. And this part kind of curves a little bit more, so it curves into the handle piece. This part also kind of curves into the handle piece. I'm going to take black, I'm going to do black kind of on the bottom of that. And take this black back on the bottom of this, so it's a little bit shaded at the bottom. And I'm going to start to define this handle a little bit more. I'm actually going to paint it mostly black. So I'll outline the shape with the black, get a little bit more white, so it's kind of more like a medium gray color. And I'm curving my paint strokes. And by curving it this direction, it's giving that handle a little bit more shape. Wipe the brush off. I'm going to grab a little bit more black. This part is dark. This bottom part is dark. It would be more dark and shadowy towards the bottom. I'm going to add some lighter highlight color on the top or on the left edge of the handle. So I'm actually going to rinse my brush off to get all the black off the brush. Rinse that number 4 around, dry it, and grab our white. And at the top, I'm just going to kind of outline and drag down so that this part is lighter and the bottom part's darker. So next, I am going to add a few more kind of dry brush strokes with titanium white to the bucket to give it more of this kind of shiny look. If this is dry, so if this isn't dry, you may want to kind of wait for it to dry a little bit more, but I'm going to grab a little bit of white on the end of my number 12 bright brush, and I'm just going to barely let this kind of skid the surface of the canvas. So it's not super thick, it's very thin, kind of translucent, and I'm just doing these kind of curved strokes towards the bottom. Over on the left, I did kind of a vertical paint stroke at the top and the middle part, kind of curved to fill this kind of light colored glare in the middle of the bucket. And that bright color against the dark first layer we did really gives it that shiny look, the kind of rustic galvanized steel look that we're going for. And I'm outlining the edge, this bottom or the top edge of the opening of the bucket. A lot of this is actually going to be covered up later by our leaves and flowers, but I'm just going to outline it anyway, just in case parts of this are still showing. I'm just using the tip of the brush and gently kind of outlining that top edge. I'm going to highlight maybe a few more parts of this bucket. Sometimes it's tempting to just go crazy on all the shiny details. A little bit, like a small one on the lower right corner. And the final detail I'm going to do to the bucket is paint 2 very, very thin black lines. I'm going to use my number 4 round brush for this, and you want to make sure all your bristles are really gathered together and make it a nice point so that you can do this thin line. So I'm going to load my brush, just the tip of the brush in the black, and very carefully do a thin black line that's going in a curved direction. So this is running parallel to the curve that is on the top and the bottom of the bucket. Next, we are going to paint the leaves of the geranium flowers. So these leaves are kind of a unique shape, and they have these they're rounded leaves, kind of big rounded leaves, but with wavy edges. And so we're going to just kind of mimic that shape. It does help if you look at a picture of geraniums and really kind of observe the shape of their leaves. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the number 4 round brush, and I'm going to mix green and white together. So mixing equal parts green and white. Using that white in that green is actually very important to allow for the leaf to be opaque against the dark of the background. So I'm going to outline the shape of the leaf first. So it's kind of a rounded shape, but the ends are kind of scalloped, wavy. So you kind of just paint the shape of it. The base of the leaf kind of goes to more of a narrow point, and then just fill that in solid with that light color green. So you want to do this. These leaves are all just going to be kind of hanging out over the edge of the bucket. So this leaf over here is kind of hanging out the side of the corner, and you want to kind of have them face different directions. So I just kind of wiggle my brush for the scalloped edges, just kind of press and wiggle the brush, and that kind of creates the wavy edge for the leaf. And they all don't have to be the same size. I'm going to take, for this one and the other ones, I'm actually going to take a little bit more green, so the darker green. At the base of the leaf, I'm going to drag some dark color and kind of drag it outwards at different angles to paint the base of the leaf. So I'm going to do it to this one too. So taking that darker green and drag it outwards so that the bottom part of the leaf is a little bit darker and the end of the leaf is a little bit lighter. So dragging that with that dark green. So if you look at what the finished version of these leaves look like, they're darker at the bottom and they're lighter on the edges. And we're going to do light color veins, but we're not going to do that until this layer dries. So I'm going to do some more leaves with the light green. So do the scalloped edges, paint that in solid. And then take my dark green, drag it from the bottom outwards. That one didn't really show up like the other ones did, but that's okay. We can always go back and do another darker layer on the bottom if we need to, or add a teeny bit of black to make a dark green layer at the bottom. I'm going to do another leaf. This one's just kind of floating. We don't really see the stems of these leaves. We are going to do stems though, that are kind of growing more upwards, and those are going to be where a lot of our blossoms are going to be. So I'm just mixing more light colored green with my green and white. I'm going to do maybe another leaf down here that's overlapping the edge of the bucket. Paint it in solid. Then do my dark green. So we're going to start painting the stems, and these are the geranium flowers, the blossoms. The stems for the blossoms kind of grow upwards and they kind of segment out. So I'm going to kind of mimic the behavior that these geraniums grow in. So it's almost like we're painting little tiny tree branches in here. Most of these are going to have 3 different sections, so like one in the center and then 2 parts that kind of segment out. And I'm just using the same color combination of the green and the white. Again, the white's important to help your green kind of show up against the dark background. I'm going to do another branch stem set. This one's a little bit higher. And this one might curve a little bit more to the right, so you can create some variety in the heights of your stems. I'm going to do 3 for now, knowing that I'm going to add more later. What I'm going to do next is add some darker color to the bottom of each of the leaves. We already kind of did that, but I'm going to go a step further and create an even darker layer. And I am mixing just a teeny bit of black into the green. So this is a very dark green now. And then I'm going to just kind of drag those little angle paint strokes just at the bottom, going over some of the lighter color, but it is creating this very dark bottom base layer for the leaves. So you're just taking that and dragging it outwards, and you're doing that to each of the leaves. It's not covering all of that first dark layer we did. In fact, it's kind of dry brush. I'm not applying this very thickly. I'm also holding the brush very lightly. Next, I am going to show you how to paint the little geranium flowers, and we are going to try to be simple about this. I am going to use 2 different reds to get these flowers to have some nice color variation, so they're not all the same type of red. So this is Cad Red Medium and Alizarin Crimson. So one's much darker red, kind of a cooler red, and one is more of a warm red. And let's use our number 4 round brush. So let's start with the brighter red, the Cad Red, And I am going to start on the stem. I'm going to do a very basic 5-petaled flower. So you're really just kind of pressing down with the paintbrush and forming these little 5-petaled flowers. Now, not all of them have to show that frontal view of 5-petaled flowers. So some of these might just be like little dots. So you're just kind of pressing down with your brush. So you're just creating like a variety of colors. So you can dip your brush in Alizarin Crimson. You can have the Alizarin Crimson mix with the Cad Red. We can even start introducing a little bit of white in there so that we create different tints of red. So you're going for those little 5-petaled flowers, but also painting them at different angles, different sizes, using a variety of color, and some of those are just like little dots. You're doing this on the ends of each of the branches, creating little bundles of red flowers, and also that helps to look at a picture of geranium flowers and just kind of look at how they bloom and how they kind of form little stems and little clusters of flowers. So right now I'm introducing the white, and it's kind of the same thing, kind of pressing down on your brush to form little 5-petaled flowers. And you'll find that at first it kind of takes a while to kind of paint all the little flowers. You want to try to be perfect about it, but then eventually, for me, I found it myself just kind of being more abstract about it and kind of pressing down, making little blobs of paint color to kind of create that impressionistic look with the flowers, kind of loose style. And then so down here, I'm doing more flowers, and these are just kind of clustered. We don't really see the stem they're attached to. And they're just kind of slightly overlapping some of the leaves. Some might be slightly overlapping parts of the bucket, but it's really filling in all that dark space there. And by the time we're done, we're really not going to see much of that black opening of the bucket anymore. And a lot of these are mostly just kind of like pressing with my brush, creating little marks of petals. And you're just going to keep going with this whole concept of painting little bundles of red petaled flowers using different variations of white to create different tints. So making some that are kind of overlapping this stem. And some that are kind of floating over on the left above the leaves. So again, not all of these petals have to have that stem showing. You can even have a few little dots that are kind of overlapping some of the leaves. And then I'm just going to kind of like maybe dot a few more random petals throughout. I'm going to go back and actually add a few more stems, and these are going to be stems that have like little buds of flowers that are not completely bloomed all the way. This is the number 8 round brush. You could actually do this with the 4 round since we did it with the 4 round earlier. I just happened to grab this brush. I'm going to do a few more stem lines, kind of very similar to what we just did, but these ones just have one little stroke of red paint, and these are just little flower buds that are starting to bloom. That's a nice little fun variety that you can do in your geranium bouquet or geranium planter. The next thing I'm going to do is add a bit of contrast in these flowers. I'm going to add some dark in the very, very center of the flowers that where we see kind of the 5-petal flowers. I'm not going to do this to the parts of the flowers where I just did the little dot, just the ones that are obviously 5-petaled flowers where there's like the frontal view. So I'm using the number 8 round brush and Mars Black. And in the very, very center of these flowers, I'm just gonna drag a little black paint to make kind of like this little asterisk star in the middle, just kind of dragging it outwards. And the point is to get that center of the flower to be dark in the center. And again, I'm only doing this to the bigger 5-petaled flowers and not the little dotted flowers. I am going to next rinse the black off of my brush, and I'm going to use titanium white to paint one little white dot in the center. So if your black is saturated and that white dot is not showing up, you'll want to do this after this dries. But for the most part, I am able to get a white dot right in the center of all the flowers that I just did the little black lines in the center. So this really helps to create contrast in our flowers, gives them a little bit more detail than them just being solid color. Next, I'm going to outline the outer ends of each of the leaves, and I don't need to rinse my brush for this. So I'm going to take, this is still the number 8 round brush, I'm going to take the white and mix a little bit of green into it. So this is not pure white, it's actually a very, very light green. It is lighter than the light green layer that we initially did. And so what I'm doing here is I am outlining the outer, I would say inner or outer, doesn't matter, just the edge of each of these leaves. This is going to help create some pretty contrast in these leaves, help them to stand out a little bit better. Just on the end with this light green. So the bottom of our leaf is very dark and the very end of that is light in color. I'm going to also do some of the leaf veins with this lighter color. So to do that, I'm going to do a line down the middle, and then I'm going to just use the tip of the brush to get these very, very thin lines, and you're just going to kind of drag your brush outwards in kind of a curved, angled direction after you do your center line. These lines again are very, very small, very thin. You're holding your brush lightly so you're not pressing hard and creating thick lines. And you're just doing this to each of the leaves. You just kind of want to make that line right down the center of the leaf to get the angle of that line. Sometimes it helps to add just a teeny bit of water. That'll get the flow of that paint to be a little bit easier to work with. And I'm just going to outline this with a little bit brighter white so that stands out. Just the edge of this leaf right here. We are going to add the American flag detail and little red, white, and blue star details in our arrangement. So what I'm going to do is paint the pole for our little flag, and this is done with the number 8 round brush. So we can start with black, just paint like this diagonal black line to get kind of the angle that you want for your flag. And then we can go in and do like a little oval at the top and just make the pole a little bit thicker. To add shading to the pole, we can have one side, either the left or the right, be dark, and then the opposite side be a little bit lighter. I'm going to add a little bit more dark over here on the left side of that little oval that's on top of the pole. And then rinse the brush and let's do 2 stars. We're going to paint these stars solid white first. So I'm just going to take my 8 round. And if this is easier with that other round brush, if you're also using the number 4 round brush, you can do it with that brush instead. I'm just going to paint a star shape and then fill it in solid white. Each of the little triangle points of the star do not have to be perfectly even. And then also I didn't want my star to overlap any of the flowers, so I kind of positioned it to where it's going around the flowers. So yours might be in a different position. And I'm going to do a second star. So this one's a little bit smaller. It also, I didn't want it to touch the other star, so I kind of made a little triangle that's on the left a little bit shorter. And we can just pretend that this one is kind of going at an angle so we don't see the full frontal view of the star. Next, I'm going to paint the flag. So I'm just going to paint this kind of loose, it's a rectangle shape, but we have to kind of imagine how it would look if it's hanging down and just kind of draping down. So it wouldn't really look like a perfect rectangle. It would have wavy edges to it. So you just kind of define that shape and then fill that in solid white. Next, let's paint the sticks of the star. I'm going to add just a teeny bit of water to my brush to kind of get this black to kind of loosen up just a bit. And there's still white on my brush, which is fine. I'm just going to take this and do a line from the center of the star to where it is in the bucket. I did not make any of those lines overlap any of the leaves or flowers, so they're going kind of behind everything. I'm going to kind of outline the bottom part. I'm not going to outline the entire star, but just the bottom parts and sides of some of the points. That's going to give the star a little bit of kind of depth contrast. So this part right here, this diagonal line, and then these two diagonals and this one on the right. Next, let's do the red, white, and blue colors on the stars and the flag, starting with the star in the middle. I'm going to do red stripes, and I will say you are welcome to customize and change colors and patterns for this. This is still the number 8 round brush, and I'm just using the Cad Red Medium. You can actually use any of the reds. You can dip in both the reds. It doesn't really matter. And you're just doing stripes with red, and you're leaving the white visible between each of the stripes. I'm going to load some fresh Phthalo Blue on my palette next and rinse that number 4 round brush, or the number 8 round brush, off. And let's do the dark blue detail in the flag as well as the dark blue of the star that's on the right. So the flag, let's do a rectangular area and kind of the upper part of this flag and just fill that in solid blue. And then I'm going to do the star solid blue. So when the blue of this dries, I can go back and do little white dots on top of that. Next, I'm going to rinse the brush and do the stripes of the flag. Again, the stripes can be either of the reds. I'm actually just going to mix both reds together. And we're going to start with the one over here at the top. Make that one red. So when we're doing these stripes, we don't have to do the exact correct number. We can just assume that they might be hidden. Also, they don't need to be spaced evenly apart. So when we paint these, they can run very, very close to each other. They can even touch each other. And they're not straight lines, they're wavy lines. So this one's going to be right at the bottom. I was not able to fit exactly 7 stripes in there. I was able to get 6, and that's okay. One of them is kind of hiding. And if we need to kind of touch up any of the red, we can. But you see how they kind of like the stripes kind of run together? I'm going to rinse the brush, and as long as our blue is dry, we can do the stars, and I'm just going to do dots instead of actual stars. So titanium white, number 8 round brush, and I'm just doing little dots. I'm also going to do little dots on the blue star. Next, we are just going to kind of fill up our bucket a little bit more with more flowers. If you want this to look more full, you can paint more flowers. You can paint more stems, more little buds of flowers to just kind of fill it up however full you want it to look. I'm adding more green to my palette here so that I can do a few more stems attached to these little buds over here. And you're really just filling up a lot of the empty space, but still leaving some space, if that makes sense. Don't fill it up too much, but fill it up just enough. So some of these new flowers that I painted, I'm going to go back and do that little black marking in the center and then the little white dot again. So I'm rinsing my 8 round brush off, grabbing that black and doing the little kind of lines in the center of the flowers. And then a white dot. And a few more little buds, flower buds here and there. Next, let's do the grass detail on the bottom of our painting. And let's rinse the brush and use an 8 round brush and load this into green and white. So we want to start out with a lighter color, just because this is going to show up better if it's a lighter color because it's such a dark area. So you're just using the very tip of your round brush to paint little curved grass strokes, and you're creating little bundles of pieces of grass, and it should be light enough to show up. You can also go the opposite route. You can do darker blades in kind of the lighter area, but for now I'm kind of just focusing on the area of where the bucket is just kind of sitting on the ground. So these little grass blades are kind of overlapping the bottom part of the bucket. So you're really focusing on the very end of that brush that has the very kind of small bristles. So that's how you can create those small grass blades. And you also want to vary the colors. So some of the little grass blades are a little bit lighter. Some you'll load your brush and maybe they're a little bit darker. You don't want to go too light, so they shouldn't be white, but they should be like a really, really light green. So I'm making these little grass blades sway to the right on this side. Some little blades might be a little bit longer. And then these blades are kind of going the opposite direction. They're kind of swaying to the left. And so when I did some of the grass blades on the lighter parts, I'm using more the darker color so that can show up on the lighter parts. When you're doing the grass blades kind of over the dark shadowy parts, you can use a lighter color so that it shows up. So you get that different variation of color. I did the detailed grass mostly on the bottom of the painting. You can take this, and you just want to keep in mind if you're working back here that these might be smaller and not super defined because they're kind of far away. So we don't really have to do too many pieces of grass further in the distance. We can just kind of focus on the bottom. And then I left a lot of the area, the darker shadowy area on the bottom middle of the canvas without grass blades because it's so dark and shadowy right there. We wouldn't really see the texture there. We could do a few darker grass blades. Maybe they show up a little bit at the bottom, but I really want that area to just stay darker and shadowy, so I'm not going to do lighter color in the middle bottom area. Our painting is pretty much coming to its conclusion. If you want, you can add more little geranium flowers in there. You can also do a word on the side of the bucket. I would use dark gray so that it would show up. So maybe with a paint pen, so you can do USA or America or something patriotic. But that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint countryside geraniums. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.